On Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law looked the servant in the eyes and said, "We are not paying for her." My son just nodded. "Hi, welcome to my channel. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the new story."
On Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law looked directly at the waiter and coldly declared, "We're not paying her." My son heard her clearly and just nodded silently. I sat there, my hands trembling, feeling as if the world had just collapsed before my eyes. But then my husband got up, and when the bill came, the manager walked over and said just one sentence, which made my son's face turn pale as if he had just realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I'm deeply grateful you're here with me. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? What city or country? Drop a comment below and let's connect. Your presence means everything. A quick note. This story contains fictionalized elements crafted for entertainment and educational value. Any similarity to specific names or locations is coincidental. However, the lessons and insights I'm sharing are absolutely meaningful and worth your time. On Mother's Day, in 2024, I sat in the most expensive restaurant in Charleston, wearing an old dress I bought from a thrift store 15 years ago, watching my son's wife order lobster while my feet bled through my stockings. And then she said the words that shattered my heart. "We're not paying for her." The Harbor House sits at the edge of Charleston Harbor, all gleaming glass and white tablecloths, where the waiters wear black ties and the silverware feels heavier than anything I own. I had never been to a place like this. When Daniel called 3 days before and said he wanted to take us out for Mother's Day, I felt a flutter of hope I hadn't felt in months. Maybe he had noticed. Maybe he cared. Thomas squeezed my hand in the car on the way over and told me to try to enjoy it, but I could see the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw was set. He knew something I didn't. Victoria arrived 10 minutes late, her belly round under a designer maternity dress, her smile bright and cold as the chandelier overhead. She kissed the air beside my cheek and slid into the booth across from me, her perfume so strong it made my head swim. Daniel followed, barely glancing at me, his phone already in his hand. I tried to smile at him, tried to catch his eye, but he was scrolling his thumb, flicking across the screen, his face blank. Thomas sat beside me, silent and still, his hands folded on the table. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine, the only warmth in the room. The waiter appeared young and eager and rattled off the specials in a voice that sounded like he was reading poetry. Pan-seared scallops with truffle butter, Wagyu beef with roasted bone marrow, Maine lobster tail with drawn butter and lemon. I didn't understand half the words, but I understood the prices when I glanced at the menu. $22 for a cup of soup, $45 for a salad, $110 for the lobster. My stomach twisted. I thought of the $17 left in my checking account, the insulin vial in my purse that was already half empty, the way I had started skipping my evening dose to make it last another week. Victoria didn't even look at the menu. She ordered the lobster, the scallops as an appetizer, a glass of champagne, and a side of truffle fries. She said it all with a little laugh, like it was nothing like money grew on trees in her backyard. Daniel ordered the Wagyu steak medium rare and another glass of wine. He still hadn't looked at me. I felt my hands shaking in my lap and I pressed them together hard, trying to steady myself. Thomas leaned over and whispered, "Order whatever you want, Ellie." But I couldn't. I couldn't do it. I ordered the soup. Just the soup. The waiter wrote it down without expression and disappeared. Victoria leaned back in her chair and placed one hand on her belly, smiling at me. "Eleanor, you look so tired. Are you feeling all right?" Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, watching me like a cat watches a bird. I told her I was fine, that I was just a little worn out from the week. She nodded slow and deliberate and said, "You really should take better care of yourself. At your age, you can't afford to let things slip." I felt the heat rise in my face, shame and anger mixing together, until I couldn't tell them apart. Thomas shifted beside me, and I felt his hand find mine under the table, his fingers curling around mine, warm and steady. The food came course after course, plates piled high with things I had only seen on television. Victoria's lobster was enormous, red and glistening, cracked open to reveal white meat soaked in butter. She ate slowly, deliberately, making little sounds of pleasure, her eyes flicking to me between bites. My soup sat in front of me, a small white bowl with a swirl of cream on top, and I ate it carefully, trying to make it last, trying not to think about the price. My foot throbbed a dull ache that had been building all day, and I felt the dampness in my stocking, the slow seep of blood from the sore that wouldn't heal. I shifted in my seat, trying to ease the pressure, but the pain only sharpened. Halfway through the meal, Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Daniel a picture. I couldn't see what it was, but he smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him all night, and said, "That's amazing, Vic." She glanced at me and said, "We just got the ultrasound back. Everything looks perfect. The baby is healthy and strong." She turned the phone toward me, and I saw the grainy black and white image, the tiny shape curled in the center. I tried to smile, tried to say something kind, but the words stuck in my throat. Thomas said nothing. He just stared at the phone, his face unreadable. I should have been happy. I should have felt joy at the thought of becoming a grandmother. But all I could think was, how will they afford a baby when they won't even pay for my soup? When the waiter brought the check, Victoria didn't reach for it. She just sat there, her hands folded on the table, waiting. Daniel glanced at the bill, and I saw his jaw tighten just a fraction, but he didn't move. The silence stretched out thick and heavy, and I felt my heart start to pound. Thomas reached for his wallet, slow and deliberate, and I wanted to stop him, wanted to say something, but I couldn't make my voice work. Victoria spoke first. She looked at the waiter and said in that same sweet, sharp voice, "We're not paying for her." She pointed at me, one manicured finger extended like I was something she had found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "We invited them, but we're not covering their meals. They can pay for themselves." The words hung in the air. I felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward us, felt the weight of their stares pressing down on my shoulders. Daniel nodded. He didn't say a word, just nodded and looked away. I felt something crack open inside me, something I had been holding together for months, maybe years, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there staring at the check, at the numbers that blurred together, and felt the tears start to burn behind my eyes. Thomas stood up. The movement was sudden, deliberate, and the whole table went quiet. I looked up at him, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before, something cold and final like a door closing. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. His hand steady, his eyes locked on Daniel. He said, "Let me show you what we're really paying for." And I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after Victoria's words felt like a physical thing pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was sit there in my 15-year-old dress with my bleeding foot and watch my son look away from me. Then Thomas stood up. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. I didn't know what he was going to do. He'd been hiding secrets from me. I would learn that later. But in that moment, all I knew was that he was fighting for me. His hand left mine. He straightened to his full height, and even at 71 with a bad back and knees that creaked when it rained, there was something commanding about him, something that made the waiter pause mid-step, made Victoria's smile falter, made Daniel finally look up. "And there's no check to split," Thomas said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried across the restaurant like a stone dropping into still water. "I already paid for this dinner, at 3 o'clock this afternoon." I stared at him. Paid with what money? Victoria's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Hayes is correct." The voice came from behind me. I turned to see a man in a dark suit approaching our table. He was younger than us, maybe 50, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident stride that suggested he owned the place. "I'm Anthony Romano, general manager of the Harbor House." He nodded at Thomas. "Mr. Hayes came in this afternoon and prepaid for your reservation. Cash." How much? Victoria's voice had gone sharp. Thomas looked at her, then at Daniel, then at me. When our eyes met, I saw something in his face that made my heart clench. Resignation, determination. "Love? $550, he said. "It was our rent money for May." The words didn't make sense at first. Rent money, our rent money. The money we needed to keep the roof over our heads, the money we'd been scraping together for weeks, skipping meals and cutting pills in half. "Thomas," I whispered, "what did you do? We're 2 months behind." He continued, still looking at me, only at me. The eviction notice started last week. We got the first warning on Tuesday. I felt the room tilt. 2 months. I'd known we were behind, but I hadn't known it was that bad. Thomas had been handling the rent, had told me not to worry, had said he'd worked out a payment plan with the landlord. Another lie. Another secret. But why? My voice cracked. Why would you? Because I knew they would do exactly what they just did. He turned to face Daniel now, and I saw my husband's face transform into something cold and hard. I knew my son would refuse to pay for his dying mother. The word dying hung in the air. I wanted to protest to say I wasn't dying, but we both knew it was only partially a lie. My A1C had hit 11 last month. My kidney function was declining. The neuropathy was spreading. Daniel's face had gone white. Dad, You didn't what? Thomas's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. You didn't mean to humiliate your mother on Mother's Day. You didn't mean to make her feel like a burden. You didn't mean to let your wife announce she's not paying for the woman who gave you life. People were staring now. I could feel their eyes on us, could hear the rustle of whispers spreading through the restaurant like wildfire. Someone at the next table had their phone out screen glowing in the dim light. Thomas, please, I said, reaching for his hand. Let's just go. But he didn't move. He squeezed my hand once, twice, then released it. No, he said softly. Let them see. He turned back to Anthony Romano, who had been standing quietly through the entire exchange. I want to thank you for your discretion earlier, Thomas said, and I want to apologize for the scene. No apology necessary, Mr. Hayes. Anthony's voice was gentle. I understand family is complicated. Not this complicated, Thomas said. He looked at Daniel again. Your mother and I gave you $900,000 in 2008. Half of your grandfather's inheritance. We kept the other half for emergencies. We thought it would be enough. My hands had started to shake. $900,000. I remembered Daniel's promise that day. I'll always take care of you. We didn't know we'd have to choose between your mother's insulin and our electricity bill. Thomas continued. Daniel tried again, but Thomas cut him off with a look. I spent that $550 because I wanted to give your mother one nice meal. One evening where she didn't have to look at prices, didn't have to worry, didn't have to feel like a burden. His voice finally broke just slightly. I should have known better. I felt tears streaming down my face. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. I'd seen him carrying it when we left the house, but I hadn't asked. I'd learned not to ask about things that might have bad answers. I came prepared, he said, opening the folder, because I knew this moment would come. The first document he pulled out was yellowed at the edges. I recognized it immediately, the inheritance disbursement form from 2008. My signature at the bottom next to Thomas's. We gave you $900,000, Thomas said. April 2nd, 2008. You were 26 years old. You said you'd invested in your business, that you'd make us proud, that we'd never have to worry. I remembered that day. Daniel had cried when we told him, had hugged us both so tightly. I won't let you down, he'd promised. I swear, Mom, Dad, I'll make this worth it. And if you ever need anything, it's yours. You bought your first house that year, I said quietly. The condo downtown. You paid cash. Daniel flinched. You started your consulting firm. You married Victoria. 2 years later, we gave you another $20,000 for the wedding. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. You bought the beach house. You bought the Tesla. You took trips to Europe, to Asia, to places we'd only seen in magazines. We never asked you to account for it, Thomas added. It was your money, your inheritance. We just asked that you remember where it came from. He pulled out another document, a bank statement showing our half of the inheritance. $900,000, our safety net, our retirement, our insurance against the future. We kept our half, Thomas said. $900,000. We were careful with it. We invested it conservatively. We didn't touch it except for emergencies. I saw where this was going, felt my chest tighten. We thought it would be enough, I whispered. Thomas looked at me, and I saw all the years of worry and fear in his eyes. We thought it would last forever, he said, but it didn't. He reached into the folder again, pulled out a thick stack of papers, medical bills, hospital statements, pharmacy receipts, months and months of numbers all stamped paid or past due or final notice. And the reason why, Thomas said looking back at Daniel, is what broke your mother's heart. Thomas looked at Daniel across the table, the manila folder open in his hands, and said, "Let me tell you a story, son, about 16 years ago." And I knew he was going back to the beginning, to the day we gave our son everything. The first document he pulled from the folder was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded. I recognized it immediately, the inheritance disbursement form from March 2008. My signature was at the bottom next to Thomas's. Both of us younger, then both of us still believing in promises. March 15th, 2008. Thomas set his finger tracing the date. 3 weeks after my parents died. I closed my eyes, remembering. The phone call at 2 a.m, Thomas's face when he hung up gray and hollow. The accident had been quick, a semi-truck crossing the median on I-26, no time to brake, no time to pray. His father died on impact. His mother held on for 6 hours, long enough to squeeze Thomas's hand once in the ICU before the machines went quiet. They left us $1,800,000. Thomas continued. The house in Somerville life insurance policies, 40 years of savings, everything they'd worked for. I opened my eyes and looked at Daniel. He was staring at the paper, his face unreadable. "We had a choice to make," Thomas said. "Keep it all or share it with you." The memory was so vivid I could smell the coffee we'd been drinking that morning, could feel the kitchen table beneath my palms as we sat across from each other at dawn, neither of us having slept since the funeral. 1,800,000, I'd said, my voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. It doesn't feel real. Thomas had been holding the estate lawyer's summary, reading and rereading the numbers as if they might change. It's what they wanted, for us to be secure, for you to be taken care of. I'd known what he meant. My diabetes had been diagnosed 2 years earlier. The medications were expensive, even with insurance. We'd already started making adjustments, generic brands, mail-order pharmacies, stretching prescriptions when we could. "What about Daniel?" I'd asked. Thomas had looked up at me, then his eyes red-rimmed from crying and not sleeping. "What about him?" "He's 26. He's trying to start his business. That tech consulting firm with his friends." I'd wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, seeking warmth. This money could change his life. It could change ours, too. We'd sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the sun was rising over our rental house, the one we'd lived in for 15 years, because we'd never quite saved enough for a down payment. Thomas's firefighter pension was decent, but not generous. My part-time bookkeeping job barely covered groceries. "I think we should give him half," Thomas had finally said. "Half." I'd looked at him, startled. "Not all of it. We need to keep some Eleanor for emergencies, for when we're older and can't work anymore." He'd reached across the table, taken my hand. "For your medical expenses if they get worse." "But what if he needs it all?" "Then we'll help him with what we have. But I need to know you're protected first." I'd felt tears prick my eyes then, not from grief, but from love. After 38 years of marriage, he was still putting me first. 900,000 each, I'd said softly. "That's fair." Now, in the Harbor House, Thomas laid the inheritance form on the table between us and Daniel. Victoria had gone very quiet, her face pale in the candlelight. "We gave you $900,000, Thomas said. April 2nd, 2008. You were 26 years old. You said you'd invest it in your business, that you'd make us proud, that we'd never have to worry." I remembered that day, too. Daniel had cried when we told him, had hugged us both so tightly I could barely breathe. "I won't let you down," he'd promised. "I swear, Mom, Dad, I'll make this worth it. And if you ever need anything, it's yours." "You bought your first house that year," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Thomas had stood up. "The condo downtown. You paid cash." Daniel flinched. "You started your consulting firm. You married Victoria. 2 years later, we gave you another $20,000 for the wedding." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking in my lap. "You bought the beach house in Isle of Palms. You bought the Tesla. You took trips to Europe, to Asia, to places we'd only seen in magazines. We never asked you to account for it." Thomas added. "It was your money, your inheritance. We just asked that you remember where it came from." He pulled out another document, a bank statement from April 2008, showing our half of the inheritance deposited into our joint savings account. $900,000, our safety net, our retirement, our insurance against the future. "We kept our half," Thomas said. $900,000. We were careful with it. We invested it conservatively. We didn't touch it except for emergencies. I saw where this was going, felt my chest tighten with the weight of what was coming next. "We thought it would be enough," I whispered. Thomas looked at me, and I saw all the years of worry and fear and desperate hope in his eyes. "We thought it would last forever," he said, "but it didn't." He reached into the folder again, pulled out a thick stack of papers. Medical bills, hospital statements, pharmacy receipts. Months and months and months of numbers, all of them stamped paid or past due or final notice. "And the reason why," Thomas said, looking back at Daniel, "is what broke your mother's heart." Thomas reached for the next document in the folder, and I knew what it was before he laid it on the table. I'd seen these papers before, every single one of them stacked on our kitchen counter, stuffed in the mailbox, haunting my nightmares when I couldn't sleep. Bank statements. 3 of them spanning 16 years. The first one showed our account balance in April 2008, $900,000, our half of the inheritance. The second statement was from December 2021, $312,000. Still substantial, still a cushion, still hope. The third was from last month, April 2024, $50,000. I watched Thomas lay them out in a row, watched the numbers tell the story of our slow collapse, and I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink through the floor of this beautiful restaurant and never come back up, because now everyone could see it. Everyone in this room with their expensive clothes and their full wine glasses could see exactly how poor we'd become. 900,000 to 50,000 in 16 years, Thomas said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "That's $850,000. Gone." Someone gasped. I didn't look up to see who. "Where did it go?" Thomas asked, though the question was rhetorical. He already had the answer in his hands. "It went here." He pulled out the medical bills. Not all of them there were too many for that, but a representative sample. Hospital invoices, pharmacy statements, bills from the endocrinologist, the podiatrist, the nephrologist. Each one stamped with dates and account numbers and amounts that made my stomach turn. "My wife was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in February 2021, Thomas said. "She was 66 years old. We thought we were prepared. We had Medicare. We had savings. We thought we'd be okay." I remembered that doctor's appointment. Doctor. Andrea Walsh sitting across from me in her small office, her face kind but serious. "Your A1C is 9.2, Mrs. Hayes. I'm afraid we need to start you on medication immediately." I'd nodded and smiled and asked all the right questions, but all I could think was how much this was going to cost. "Medicare covers 80% of medical expenses," Thomas continued. 80% sounds like a lot, doesn't it? It sounds generous. He looked around the restaurant, making eye contact with the people watching us, the people with their phones out recording every word. "But 20% of $100,000 is $20,000, he said. "And over 3 years with hospitalizations and medications and equipment and specialist visits, the 20% added up." He pulled out a calculator, an old one, the kind with the big buttons that we'd had since the 90s, and started pressing keys. Insulin alone cost us $27,000 out of pocket over 3 years. That's the 20% Medicare doesn't cover, plus the co-pays, plus the medications that aren't on the formulary. $27,000. I'd tried not to think about it in total, had only looked at the monthly bills, the individual prescriptions. Looking at the sum made me feel sick. She needed a continuous glucose monitor. Medicare covered 80%. We paid the rest, $4,000 over 3 years. I touched my arm reflexively, feeling the small disc of the CGM under my sleeve. It had been a miracle when Dr. Walsh prescribed it, had helped me track my blood sugar in real time, had probably saved my life. But I'd known what each sensor cost when I changed it every 10 days. $15, $30 a month, $360 a year. It added up. 3 hospitalizations, Thomas said. 1 for diabetic ketoacidosis in March 2022. 1 for a foot infection that required IV antibiotics in September 2022. 1 for hypoglycemia and dehydration this past March. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to remember those hospital stays, didn't want to remember the fear in Thomas's face when he found me unconscious on the bathroom floor, didn't want to remember the bills that came afterward. Medicare paid 80% of $65,000 in hospital costs, Thomas said. We paid $13,000. $13,000. I'd been in the hospital for a total of 11 days across 3 years. That was over $1,000 per day that we'd paid out of pocket. Then there are the medications. Metformin, Jardiance, glipizide, atorvastatin for her cholesterol, lisinopril for her blood pressure medication because diabetes causes hypertension, cholesterol medication because diabetes raises your cholesterol. He was reading from a list now, one he must have compiled himself, and hearing all the names of my medications recited in public made me want to cry. The medications cost us another $15,000 over 3 years. The test strips, the lancets, the syringes, another $8,000. The podiatrist visits for her neuropathy, $6,000. The nephrologist visits because her kidney function started declining, $5,000. The eye doctor appointments because diabetes can cause blindness, $3,000. The numbers kept coming. I stopped listening to the individual amounts and just heard the accumulation, the relentless addition of cost upon cost upon cost. $168,500, Thomas finally said. That's what we paid out of pocket over 3 years for my wife's diabetes care. Not the total cost that was over $800,000, but our share. The 20% Medicare didn't cover. The co-pays, the medications that weren't covered, the equipment we had to buy. He laid out the final document, a spreadsheet he'd made himself, every expense logged and categorized and totaled. I recognized his handwriting in the margins, the notes he'd made about payment plans and billing disputes and appeals we'd filed with Medicare. $68,500 per year, $5,700 per month, $190 per day. That's what it cost to keep me alive. We drained our savings trying to keep her healthy, Thomas said quietly. $850,000 down to $50,000 over 16 years, most of it in the last 3. I felt Daniel's eyes on me, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at anyone. But the medical bills weren't the worst part, Thomas said. I looked up at him, then confused. What could be worse than this? What could be worse than having your poverty displayed in front of strangers, your illness itemized and totaled and judged? Thomas met my eyes, and I saw something in his face that made my blood run cold. He knew something I didn't know he knew. He'd found something I'd been hiding. The worst part, he said slowly, is what those bills forced my wife to do. Thomas reached into the folder and pulled out something small, a spiral notebook with a faded blue cover. My notebook. The one I'd kept hidden at the bottom of my purse, tucked under old receipts and expired coupons. The one I thought no one would ever see. My heart stopped. No? I whispered. Thomas, please. But he was already opening it, his fingers gentle on the pages as if he were handling something sacred or evidence. November 8th, 2023. He read aloud. His voice cracked on the date. Half dose again. God forgive me. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt the restaurant spin around me. I'd written those words at 2 a.m. in our bathroom with the door locked and the fan running, so Thomas wouldn't hear me cry. Thomas, I said again, but it came out as barely a whisper. He turned the page. November 12th. Skipped morning dose. Will take half tonight if blood sugar goes above 300. I remembered that day. I'd felt shaky all morning, had tested my blood sugar at noon and seen 287 on the screen. Close enough, I'd told myself. I could wait. November 18th. Down to 3 vials. Need to make them last until January. 3 vials should have lasted me 6 weeks at my prescribed dose. I'd made them last 10. December 3rd. Thomas asked why I was so tired. Told him it was just a cold. I had been tired. Exhausted, actually. High blood sugar, did that made you feel like you were moving through water, like every step took twice the effort it should? But I couldn't tell him why. If I told him, he'd know what I was doing. And if he knew, he'd sell everything we had left to buy my insulin. He'd give up his medication, his doctor's visits, anything to keep me alive. I couldn't let him do that. Why? Daniel's voice cut through the silence. He was staring at the notebook, his face pale. Why would you? Because we couldn't afford it, Thomas said simply. He looked at our son with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, something worse. Disappointment. Because the insulin your mother needs costs $460 a month out of pocket. Because we had to choose between her medication and our electric bill. Between her staying alive and us keeping a roof over our heads. He turned more pages. I could see my handwriting on each one cramped and small, the pen pressed hard into the paper, as if I could somehow make the words less true by writing them smaller. January 15th. Sore on left foot not healing. Might need podiatrist, but can't afford appointment. That sore had taken 3 months to close. I'd cleaned it myself every night, had wrapped it in gauze, and prayed it wouldn't get infected. It had left a scar, a small white circle on my instep that I saw every time I put on my shoes. February 2nd. Blood sugar 290 when I woke up. Felt dizzy all day. Didn't tell Thomas. February 26th. Out of test strips. Using each one twice by cleaning and reusing. Please God, let this work. I heard someone gasp. The woman at the table next to us, I think her hand over her mouth. But I couldn't look at her. I could only look at Thomas at the way his hands trembled as he held my secrets. I hid it from you, I said to him, ignoring everyone else. I hid it because I knew what you'd do. You'd sell the house. You'd sell your truck. You'd give me everything and leave yourself with nothing. You're my wife, he said roughly. You're supposed to come first. And you're my husband. You're supposed to let me make my own choices. We stared at each other across the table, across 46 years of marriage and love and sacrifice, and all the things we'd never said out loud. Thomas broke the eye contact first. He looked back down at the notebook. March 9th. He read. His voice had gone very quiet. Feeling strange today. Sweating a lot. Vision blurry. Blood sugar 320 at dinner. Should probably take full dose tonight, but only 1 vial left. Half dose instead. March 9th, the day before. March 10th, no entry. He closed the notebook and set it on the table next to the medical bills and the bank statements and all the evidence of our gradual collapse. March 10th, 6 a.m., he said, looking at Daniel now. I found your mother in our bathroom. She was unconscious. She'd been sweating so much the floor was wet. When the paramedics checked her blood sugar, it was 450. I remembered pieces of that morning. The way the bathroom tiles had felt cold against my cheek. The sound of Thomas's voice far away shouting my name. The bright lights of the ambulance. The needle sliding into my arm. Then nothing until I woke up in the ICU with machines beeping around me and Thomas holding my hand like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. Diabetic ketoacidosis, Thomas continued. She was in the ICU for 3 days. The bill was $14,200 out of pocket. He pulled out his phone, an ancient flip phone that took him 3 tries to unlock. He scrolled through something his call log, I realized, and then held it up for Daniel to see. I called you 13 times over 3 days, Thomas said. You never answered, not once. Because you were at a spa with Victoria, $920 while your mother was dying. Victoria made a small noise, quickly cut off. Your mother was dying. Thomas said, his voice steady but his eyes burning. She was in the ICU fighting for her life because she'd been rationing her insulin to save money. And you were getting a massage. I watched Daniel's face crumble, watched him finally understand the full weight of what he'd done. Or rather, what he hadn't done. She almost died, Thomas said. Your mother almost died because we ran out of money trying to keep her alive. He paused, and in that pause, I saw something shift in his expression, something that made my stomach drop. And there's one more thing, he said quietly, looking at me now instead of Daniel. Something your mother doesn't know, something I've been hiding from her this whole time. I stared at him. What could he possibly be hiding? What could be worse than what we'd already been through? Thomas. I whispered. He reached for my hand across the table. I'm sorry, Eleanor, he said. I should have told you sooner. Thomas reached into the folder again, and I watched his hand tremble as he pulled out another document. When I saw the letterhead Charleston Cancer Center, my entire world tilted sideways. No. Please, God, no. Thomas. My voice came out strangled. What is that? He didn't answer. He just laid the paper on the table between us, facing me. A pathology report. I saw the words before I could process them. Prostate-specific antigen Gleason score 7 stage 2, adenocarcinoma. Cancer. My husband had cancer. March 3rd, 2024, Thomas said quietly. His eyes were on me, only on me, as if Daniel and Victoria and the entire restaurant had ceased to exist. A week before you went into the ICU, I got the diagnosis. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The date swam before my eyes. March 3rd. He'd known for over 2 months. 2 months of carrying this alone, of waking up next to me every morning knowing he was sick and not saying a word. Stage 2. Prostate cancer, he continued. Treatable. Good prognosis if we caught it early. The oncologist said I needed to start radiation and hormone therapy immediately. He pulled out another document, an estimate from the cancer center. I saw the total at the bottom, $82,800. The number didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. That's the cost for a full course of treatment, Thomas said. Medicare would cover some of it, but with deductibles and copays, we'd still owe at least $15,000 out of pocket. And that's if everything goes perfectly. If there are complications, if the treatment doesn't work the first time, if I need surgery, he trailed off. It could be much more. I stared at the number. $82,800. We had $50,000 left in our savings. We'd need every penny of it for my insulin, my medications, my doctor visits. There wasn't enough. There would never be enough. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Because we only had $50,000 left, Eleanor. His voice was gentle but firm, and I had to choose. Treatment for me or insulin for you, my life or yours. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears spill down my cheeks, hot and fast. You chose me, I said. I will always choose you. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if there had never been any other option, as if his own life was somehow worth less than mine. You should have told me, I said, my voice breaking. You should have let me help you decide. There was nothing to decide. He reached across the table and took both my hands in his. I'm 71 years old. You're 69. We've had a good life together, but you still have years ahead of you. You could have 10, 15, 20 more years if you get the care you need. Not without you, I said. I don't want 20 years without you. And I don't want one more day watching you die because we can't afford your medication. We sat there staring at each other, both of us crying now, both of us holding on to each other's hands like we were drowning. Someone in the restaurant was crying too. I could hear the soft sound of it, could feel the weight of all those watching eyes. But I didn't care anymore. Let them see. Let them see what love looked like when you had to choose between 2 lives and only had money for one. Thomas turned to face the restaurant, still holding my hands. I started driving for Uber in March. he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Night shift, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. sometimes later, 7 days a week. I stared at him. You told me you were working security, night guard at the warehouse. I lied. He looked back at me, his face etched with guilt. I needed the money for your lab work, your test strips, your doctor copays. Medicare doesn't cover everything. There's always something else. Night guard. He'd been leaving the house at 9:30 every night for 2 months, coming home at 3 in the morning, exhausted and smelling like coffee and fast food. I'd believed him when he said it was a security job, had been grateful for the extra $400 a week it brought in. You were driving strangers around Charleston until 2 in the morning, I said slowly, at 71 years old with untreated cancer. It was good money. $800 to $1,000 a week during tourist season. It covered your medications and left a little extra. I wanted to scream at him, wanted to shake him and tell him he was being stupid and reckless and self-destructive. But I couldn't because I'd done the same thing. I'd rationed my insulin and hidden it from him and nearly died because I couldn't bear to be a burden. We were both idiots, both martyrs, both so desperate to save each other that we'd been killing ourselves in the process. How bad is it? I asked. The cancer. How far has it progressed? I don't know. His voice was very quiet. I haven't been back for follow-up. I can't afford the scans. Thomas, I'm fine, Eleanor. No symptoms, no pain. I probably have time. Probably. I felt something break open in my chest, something that had been holding me together for months, maybe years. You probably have time. You're gambling your life on, probably. I gambled it the day I married you, he said, and I'd do it again, every single time. I was still crying, but I was angry now too. Angry at him for being noble and stupid. Angry at myself for doing the same thing. Angry at Daniel for sitting there in his expensive suit while his parents slowly killed themselves trying to stay alive. Thomas must have seen something in my face because he turned to look at our son. But there's more, he said. His voice had changed, gone cold and hard again. Something else you should know, son. Something I heard you say in the hospital hallway when your mother was in the ICU. Daniel's face went white. You thought I was in the cafeteria, Thomas continued. But I was right around the corner, and I heard every word you and Victoria said. I didn't know what Thomas was talking about. I'd been unconscious in the ICU, hooked up to machines and IVs, fighting my way back from the edge of death. What could Daniel have said in a hospital hallway that would make Thomas look at him with such cold fury? But looking at our son's face, watching all the color drain from his skin until he looked like a ghost, I knew it was bad. Dad, I don't... Daniel started, but Thomas cut him off with a raised hand. March 12th. Thomas said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. 2 days after your mother collapsed, you and Victoria came to visit her in the ICU. I remembered that visit barely. I'd been drifting in and out of consciousness, the medications making everything hazy and strange. I remembered seeing Daniel's face above me, remembered him saying something about how I needed to rest, how everything would be okay. I'd believed him. You stayed for 20 minutes. Thomas continued. You held her hand, you told her you loved her, and then you went out into the hallway to talk. Daniel's hands had started to shake. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles going white. I told you I was going down to the cafeteria to get coffee, Thomas said. And I did. But when I came back, I heard voices in the hallway outside the ICU. Your voices. So I stopped around the corner. He paused, and in that pause, I felt the entire restaurant holding its breath. I listened to you talk about my wife, your mother, the woman who was lying in a hospital bed 10 feet away fighting for her life. Thomas, I whispered. What did they say? He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Pity. He was about to tell me something that would break me, and he knew it. Victoria asked Daniel a question. Thomas said slowly, still looking at me. She asked him, how long do you think she has... The words didn't make sense at first. How long do you think she has? like I was a terminal patient, like I was already dying. Daniel answered. Thomas continued. His voice had gone very quiet now, so quiet that everyone in the restaurant was leaning forward to hear. He said, "A year, maybe less." I felt something crack inside my chest. A year. My own son had looked at me lying in that hospital bed and calculated how much longer I had to live. And then Victoria said something else. Thomas's hands were trembling now, his voice breaking. She said, "Well, at least there's the life insurance. $75,000. That'll help." $75,000. My life insurance policy, the one I'd taken out 20 years ago when Daniel was still in college. The one I'd kept paying premiums on even when we could barely afford groceries because I wanted to leave him something when I died. Daniel didn't argue with her, Thomas said. He didn't tell her she was being cruel or calculating or wrong. He just said, "Yeah, it will." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My son, my only child, the boy I'd carried for 9 months and raised for 46 years, had stood in a hospital hallway and talked about my death like it was a business transaction. And then Victoria said one more thing. Thomas's voice had gone hard as steel now. She said, "Then we wait." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the soft sound of someone crying at another table, could hear the traffic outside on the street. But I couldn't hear my own thoughts, couldn't process what I'd just been told. We wait. They were waiting for me to die. "Dad, we weren't." Daniel's voice was high and panicked, the words tumbling over each other. "You misunderstood. We were just, I know what I heard." Thomas's voice cut through the excuses like a knife. "I stood in that hallway for 5 more minutes, listening to you two discuss whether the $75,000 would be enough to cover your credit card debt. Victoria said you owed $68,000 on your cards. Daniel said the insurance money would almost cover it. $68,000 in credit card debt. While Thomas and I were cutting our pills in half and rationing insulin and choosing between electricity and food, our son had racked up $68,000 buying things he couldn't afford. You weren't worried about your mother," Thomas said. "You were worried about your debt, and you saw her death as a solution to your financial problems." I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't make a sound. I just sat there in my 15-year-old dress with my bleeding foot and my broken heart and tried to understand how the little boy I'd rocked to sleep every night had turned into this stranger, Eleanor. Victoria's voice was sharp, desperate. "It wasn't like that. We were just talking. We didn't mean, 'Get out,' I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded flat and dead and far away. 'Get out of this restaurant.' Mom!" Daniel reached for me across the table, but I pulled my hands away. "Don't touch me." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man I didn't recognize. "You stood in that hallway and waited for me to die. You calculated my worth in dollars. You turned my life into a number on a balance sheet." "I never wanted you to die," Daniel said, and he was crying now too. "I swear, Mom, I never—" "But you were willing to wait," I said. "You were willing to let me suffer and struggle and ration my medication because it was easier than helping, because you needed the money more than you needed me alive." Thomas stood up his chair, scraping against the floor. "But there's something else Eleanor doesn't know," he said, looking at Daniel with an expression I'd never seen before. Something beyond anger, beyond disappointment. Something that looked almost like hatred. "Something she tried to tell you 4 months ago, but you wouldn't listen." I stared at Thomas. 4 months ago, January, I didn't remember trying to tell Daniel anything in January. But as Thomas reached into his folder again, I saw Daniel's face go from white to gray. And I realized whatever was coming next was going to be even worse. I stared at Thomas confused. 4 months ago? What had I tried to tell Daniel in January? And then I remembered. The parking lot, the man, Victoria's hand on his chest. Oh God. January 14th. Thomas said, watching my face, "You called Daniel 3 times that day. Do you remember?" I did remember. I remembered all of it, every humiliating detail. I'd tried so hard to forget, had tried to convince myself that maybe I really had been confused, that maybe my blood sugar really had been affecting my judgment. But looking at Thomas, now seeing the certainty in his eyes, I knew I'd been right all along. "I saw her," I whispered. The words felt like they were being dragged out of me. "I saw Victoria with someone." It had been a Tuesday afternoon in January. I'd had a doctor's appointment at the medical university, a follow-up with Dr. Walsh about adjusting my insulin dosage. Thomas had dropped me off and gone to run errands, and when my appointment ended early, I decided to walk to the parking garage instead of waiting in the lobby. That's when I'd seen them. Victoria and a man I didn't recognize standing between two cars on the third level of the garage. They were close together, too close, and as I watched, Victoria had reached up and touched his face. Then she'd kissed him, not a friendly peck on the cheek. A real kiss. The kind of kiss you only give someone you're sleeping with. I'd stood there frozen, my hands shaking so badly I'd almost dropped my purse. Then I'd pulled out my phone and taken a picture. The angle was bad and the image was blurry, but you could clearly see Victoria in her distinctive red coat and the man's profile. I called Daniel from the parking garage. I said now the memory sharp and painful. I told him I'd seen his wife with another man. I sent him the photo. Daniel's face had gone gray. He was staring at the table, not meeting anyone's eyes. "What did he say?" someone asked. I think it was Anthony Romano, the restaurant manager, but I couldn't be sure. The whole room seemed to be listening now, dozens of strangers leaning in to hear our family's secrets. "He said I was confused," I said. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. "He said my blood sugar was probably high and I was seeing things that weren't there. He told me to check my glucose monitor and call him back." I'd done it too. I'd checked my blood sugar right there in the parking garage, hands trembling, convinced that Daniel must be right. The meter had read 197, higher than it should be, but not high enough to cause hallucinations or confusion. I'd called Daniel back. "It's 197, I'd told him. "But I know what I saw. That was Victoria. She was kissing someone." "Mom?" His voice had been patient, the way you'd talk to a small child. 197 is high for you. You know high blood sugar can affect your thinking. Just go home and rest. We'll talk about this later." But I hadn't been able to rest. I'd been so sure of what I'd seen. So the next day, I'd called Daniel again. "I think you should talk to Victoria," I'd said. "I think something's going on." That time, he'd gotten angry. "Mom, you need to stop this. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Walsh about adjusting your medications." I'd felt myself start to doubt then. Maybe I was confused. Maybe my diabetes was affecting me worse than I'd thought. Maybe I was becoming one of those paranoid old women who saw conspiracies everywhere. The third time I'd tried to bring it up, Victoria had been there. We'd been at their house for Sunday dinner. This was early February, maybe 2 weeks after I'd seen them in the parking garage. I'd worked up my courage all week, had practiced what I was going to say. I decided to talk to Victoria directly, woman to woman. "Victoria," I'd said quietly while Daniel was in the kitchen, "I saw you in January at the hospital parking garage with a man." Her face had crumpled, just collapsed into tears so sudden and dramatic that I'd actually stepped back in shock. "How could you say that?" she'd sobbed. "How could you accuse me of something so awful?" Daniel had come running from the kitchen. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Your mother." Victoria had pressed her hands to her face, crying so hard she could barely speak. "She's accusing me of cheating on you. She says she saw me with another man." Daniel had turned to me, his face hard. "Mom, seriously. I did see her." I'd insisted. "I have a photo." "A blurry photo that could be anyone," Daniel had snapped. "This is getting out of hand. First, you call me multiple times with this crazy story. Now you're confronting Victoria in our own home." "Daniel, I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were crazy. I said you're confused. There's a difference." But his tone had said otherwise. His tone had said he thought I was losing my mind. Victoria had kept crying and Daniel had put his arm around her, and I'd stood there feeling like the villain in my own story. Like I was the one causing problems, making accusations, tearing the family apart. I'd left their house that night feeling ashamed and confused and wondering if maybe I really was losing it. If maybe diabetes really was affecting my brain in ways I didn't understand. But I wasn't confused, I said now, looking at Daniel across the table at the Harbor House. I saw exactly what I thought I saw. Thomas reached into his folder and pulled out my old phone, the flip phone I'd stopped using in February when I'd gotten so frustrated with the broken keypad that I'd bought a cheap smartphone. He opened it, pressed a few buttons with difficulty, and held up the screen. There was the photo. Blurry, poorly lit, but unmistakable. Victoria in her red coat, a man's profile, her hand on his face. The man in this photo. Thomas said his voice carrying across the restaurant is sitting in this restaurant right now. I felt my heart stop. He was here. The man I'd seen Victoria with was here. Thomas pointed toward the corner of the restaurant toward a table I hadn't paid attention to. A man sat alone, a glass of wine in front of him, his face carefully neutral. He was maybe 50 good-looking in a polished way, wearing an expensive suit. His name is Preston Walker, Thomas said. He's Daniel's business partner. He's been embezzling from their company for the past 8 months. And he's been sleeping with Daniel's wife for at least 6. Daniel's face had gone from gray to green. Dad, how do you... But before he could finish, Victoria stood up. She moved fast, defensive, her hands coming up to her chest. And as she moved, something under her dress shifted. Something that should have been part of her body. Something that moved wrong. I stared at her midsection at the place where her pregnant belly should be and watched the fabric of her dress ripple in a way that made no sense. And then I understood. I saw it. Everyone saw it. The bottom edge of Victoria's pregnant belly separated from her actual stomach. A gap. A visible line where fabric met skin in a way that skin should never meet skin. And I understood. The grandchild I'd cried tears of joy over. The baby I'd started knitting a blanket for my arthritic fingers, working the soft yellow yarn every night while Thomas drove his Uber shift. The tiny life I'd imagined holding, rocking, loving the way I'd loved Daniel 46 years ago. All of it was a lie. No, I whispered. But even as I said it, I was watching Victoria's hands fly to her midsection, watching her try to press the prosthetic back into place. Watching the fabric of her dress ripple and shift over something that was definitely not a baby. Victoria. Daniel's voice was strangled. What is that? She didn't answer. She just stood there, frozen, both hands clutching her stomach, her face white with panic. Thomas reached into his folder one more time. His hands were shaking now with anger or grief or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. He pulled out a receipt and laid it on the table. Silicone pregnancy belly, he read. 14 to 16 weeks. Skin tone medium. Ordered from Amazon on April 27th. $47.99. April 27th. 2 weeks before Mother's Day. 2 weeks before this dinner. She'd planned this. She'd ordered a fake belly specifically to wear to our Mother's Day dinner so she could announce a fake pregnancy. And this, Thomas said, pulling out another printout, a screenshot from a phone, Fake Ultrasound Pro, an app that generates realistic ultrasound images, downloaded to Victoria's phone on April 20th. The free version includes a watermark, but the premium version $12.99 removes it. I stared at the image on the printout. It was an ultrasound photo, the same one Victoria had shown us at dinner, the one I'd held in my trembling hands and cried over. The tiny blob that was supposed to be my grandchild. The grainy black and white image that was supposed to be proof of a miracle. It had been generated by an app. $12.99. You're not pregnant, Daniel said. He was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. You were never pregnant. Daniel, I can explain. Victoria started, but her voice cracked on his name. Explain what... He stood up so fast his chair fell backward, clattering against the floor. Explain why you bought a fake belly. Explain why you've been lying to me for 2 weeks, for longer than that. She looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. Every table in the restaurant was watching. Phones were up recording. The evidence was literally sliding off her body. How long? Daniel demanded. How long have you been faking this? 6 weeks, Thomas said quietly. She announced the pregnancy 6 weeks ago, which would make her 14 weeks along. But according to her medical records, which our attorney subpoenaed after the FBI opened their investigation, she hasn't seen an obstetrician. She hasn't had any prenatal appointments, no blood work, no actual ultrasounds. He pulled out another document, a letter from Carolina Women's Health on official letterhead. I called them, Thomas said, pretended to be confirming an appointment. They have no patient named Victoria Pierce in their system. I watched my son's face crumble, watched him realize that the pregnancy he'd believed in the baby he'd probably already imagined had never existed. And I felt something crack in my chest because I knew exactly how he felt. I was feeling it too. I reached into my purse with shaking hands and pulled out the project I'd been working on for 6 weeks. Soft yellow yarn, barely 8 inches of a baby blanket, the stitches uneven because my neuropathy made my fingers clumsy. I'd been knitting it every night, a few rows at a time, imagining wrapping my grandchild in it, imagining the weight of a baby in my arms. I looked down at the yellow yarn and felt tears start to fall. I was making this for the baby, I said softly. I've been working on it every night. My hands hurt so much, but I didn't care because I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted my grandchild to have something made with love. Victoria made a small sound, almost like a sob. There is no grandchild, I said. The words felt like glass in my throat. There's just a $47 piece of silicone and a $12 app, and a woman who thought it would be fun to lie about creating a life. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Victoria reached for me, but I pulled back. Don't. My voice broke. Don't you dare apologize to me. Don't you dare pretend you didn't know exactly what you were doing. Mel, I looked at the yellow yarn in my hands, at the hours of work and hope and love I'd put into something for a child who didn't exist. Then I looked at Daniel. Did you know? I asked. What no? Mom, I had no idea. Did you know she was faking it? No, I swear I thought. He ran his hands through his hair, his face twisted with anguish. Oh God, the Instagram posts, the baby account. She's been posting ultrasound photos. She's been accepting congratulations. People have sent us gifts. Money, Thomas said. People have sent you money. I checked the account. Our little miracle has received $23,400 in donations from friends and family excited about the baby. $23,000. She'd crowdfunded a fake pregnancy. I felt my hands start to shake so badly I dropped the yellow yarn. It fell to the floor and unraveled slightly, the soft thread I'd worked so carefully coming undone. Just like everything else. I was still staring at the yarn when I heard footsteps approaching our table. I looked up to see Anthony Romano, the restaurant manager, walking toward us. His eyes were wet with tears, and he was looking at Thomas with an expression I couldn't quite read. Recognition, gratitude, something deeper than either. Mr. Hayes, he said softly. His voice was thick with emotion. I thought that was you after all these years. He reached out and touched Thomas's hand, the one with the old burn scar across the knuckles. The scar Thomas had gotten in a fire 30 years ago. You don't remember me, Anthony said, but I remember you. Anthony Romano stopped at our table, his hand still resting gently on Thomas's scarred knuckles. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You saved my father's life 30 years ago. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Everyone was listening. Thomas looked up at him, confusion crossing his face. I'm sorry, I don't... March 16th, 1994, Anthony said. The warehouse fire on Morrison Drive. You were with the Charleston Fire Department, Station 7. I saw recognition flash across Thomas's face, followed immediately by something like pain. The textile warehouse, he said quietly. My father was the night supervisor. He'd gone back inside to make sure everyone had evacuated. The roof was already starting to collapse. Anthony's voice was shaking now. "You went in after him. Your captain ordered you not to, but you went anyway." Thomas closed his eyes. "I remember. You found him on the 3rd floor, unconscious from smoke inhalation. You carried him down 2 flights of stairs while the building burned around you. A beam fell on your hand." Anthony touched the scar again. "But you didn't drop him. You got him out." I stared at my husband, at this man I'd been married to for 46 years, and realized there were still stories I'd never heard. Thomas had told me about the fire, about the injury that had ended his career as a firefighter, but he'd never told me he'd disobeyed orders. He'd never told me he'd been a hero. "Your father," Thomas said. "Is he?" "He's alive, 78 years old and living in Somerville with my mother. He has grandchildren because of you. I have a father because of you." Anthony pulled out his phone, showed Thomas a photo of an elderly man with a warm smile. "He talks about you every March 16th. Every year on the anniversary, he says a prayer of thanks for the firefighter who saved his life." I felt tears streaming down my face again, but they were different tears now. Not tears of grief or shame, but something else. Pride, gratitude, love for this man who'd risked his life for a stranger and then never mentioned it again because that's just who he was. "I recognized you when you came in this afternoon to prepay," Anthony continued. "I wasn't sure at first, but then I saw your name on the credit card receipt and I knew. Thomas Hayes, Station 7, the man who saved my father." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "You paid $550 this afternoon. Your rent money." He handed Thomas the envelope. "This is that money. I'm returning it to you. And this," he pulled out a check already written. "This is $4,500, a gift for the man who gave me my father back." Thomas stared at the check. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Anthony said firmly. "And more than that, you and your wife eat here free for the rest of your lives. Any meal, any time. It's the least I can do." $5,000. $5,000 that could pay for insulin, for medications, for doctor visits. $5,000 that meant we wouldn't be evicted, that meant we could breathe for a few more months. Thomas looked at me, his eyes asking a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "Thank you," Thomas said to Anthony, his voice rough. "Thank you." And then from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone started clapping. 1 person, then 2, then 5. Then the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People stood up. Strangers who'd been eating their expensive dinners and watching our family fall apart were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were crying. I saw a woman in a blue dress wiping her eyes. I saw an older man nodding at Thomas with respect. They were applauding us for surviving, for fighting, for still being here despite everything that had tried to break us. I looked around the restaurant through my tears and saw faces full of compassion, of anger, on our behalf, of solidarity. These strangers had witnessed our humiliation, had seen our medical bills and our poverty and our desperate struggles. And instead of looking away, instead of judging us for being poor or sick or broken, they were standing up for us. "You're an inspiration," a woman said, appearing at our table. She was maybe 40, well-dressed, her eyes red from crying. "Both of you. My mother has diabetes too. I'm going to call her tonight and make sure she has everything she needs." "God bless you both," an elderly man said, gripping Thomas's shoulder. "You deserve so much better," a young woman told me, pressing a tissue into my hand. They kept coming. One after another, these strangers who'd become witnesses offering words of comfort and support and love. Someone pressed a $20 bill into my hand. Someone else left a business card for a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse. Through it all, Daniel and Victoria sat frozen at our table, isolated in their shame. No one approached them. No one offered them comfort. They were surrounded by dozens of people and utterly alone, trapped in a circle of contempt. I saw Daniel's face, saw the realization dawning that he'd lost more than just his parents' respect. He'd lost his dignity, his reputation, any claim to decency he might have had. Thomas helped me to my feet. My legs were shaky, my bleeding foot throbbing, but I felt lighter than I had in years. We gathered our things, my purse, the yellow yarn that had fallen to the floor, Thomas's folder of evidence. Anthony walked us to the door, his hand on Thomas's shoulder, like they were old friends. "Come back anytime," he said. "Please, it would be an honor." We stepped out into the warm May evening. The sun had set while we'd been inside, and the Charleston sky was deep purple stars just beginning to appear. Thomas's truck was at the far end of the parking lot, and we walked toward it slowly, my hand in his. We'd almost reached the truck when I heard footsteps running behind us. "Mom, please," Daniel's voice. Desperate and broken and full of a grief I recognized because I'd been carrying it myself for so long. I stopped walking. Thomas's hand tightened on mine. "Please don't," Daniel said, his footsteps slowing as he approached. "Please don't leave like this." I heard Daniel calling Mom behind us, but I kept walking. Thomas's arm was around my waist, bearing some of my weight because my bleeding foot was throbbing with every step. My heart felt like it had been torn into pieces and scattered across that restaurant floor. I didn't want to hear any more excuses from my son. "Mom, please, just wait." "Keep walking," Thomas murmured to me. "We don't owe him anything." But Daniel was faster than us. He ran ahead and positioned himself in front of the truck, blocking our path. His face was streaked with tears, his expensive tie loosened and hanging askew. "Please," he said. "Please just let me explain." "Explain what?" I heard myself say. My voice sounded hollow, drained of everything. "Explain how you waited for me to die. Explain how you let your wife fake a pregnancy. Explain how you ignored my calls when I was in the ICU. I didn't know about the pregnancy," he said desperately. "I swear, Mom, I had no idea she was faking it." "But you knew about the rest." Thomas's voice was hard. "You knew you were waiting for the insurance money. You knew you were counting down the days until your mother died." Daniel flinched like he'd been struck. I wasn't. "Move aside," Thomas said. "We're leaving." "No, please, just listen." Footsteps rang out across the parking lot. We all turned to see Victoria running toward us, her fake belly now clearly visible beneath her dress, shifting and bunching in a way that no real pregnancy ever would. She'd lost one of her high heels somewhere and was limping. "Daniel, don't let them leave," she shouted. "We need to explain. They're misunderstanding everything." I stared at her. After everything that had happened, the affair, the fake pregnancy, the confession about waiting for me to die, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. "There's no misunderstanding," I said quietly. "You called me her at dinner, not Mom, not even Eleanor, just her, like I wasn't a person, like I was just an obstacle." Victoria stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. I didn't mean it like that." "We're not paying for her," I quoted back at her. "Those were your exact words. You looked right at the waiter and said you weren't paying for me. You made sure everyone in that restaurant knew I was a burden you didn't want to carry. You don't understand the pressure we've been under." Victoria started, but I cut her off. "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice was still quiet, but I felt something hardening inside me, some core of strength I'd forgotten I had. "I understand that you married my son for his money. I understand that when the money ran out, you started looking for other sources, like a $75,000 life insurance payout." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Thomas demanded. "Explain it to us. Explain why you faked a pregnancy. Explain why you were having an affair with Daniel's business partner. Explain why you've been waiting for my wife to die." Victoria's face twisted with something ugly. Desperation, maybe, or just the realization that her lies were falling apart. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice rising. "Fine, I'll tell you the truth. I owe $185,000 in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, shopping, everything. Daniel doesn't even know half of it." Daniel went white. "What, 185,000? Victoria repeated, her voice shaking now. She was spiraling, losing control of the careful facade she'd maintained for so long. "I've been juggling payments for 2 years, taking out new cards to pay off old ones, borrowing from friends. And yes, I was counting on that insurance money because we need it." The parking lot was silent except for the distant sounds of traffic on the street. I stared at this woman my son had married, this stranger who'd been living in our lives like a parasite, and felt something close to pity. "You wanted me to die so you could pay off your shopping debt," I said. Not a question, a statement. "I never wanted you to die." Victoria started, but even she seemed to know how hollow it sounded. "You said we wait," Thomas quoted back at her. "In the hospital. Daniel said Eleanor had maybe a year left, and you said, we wait. What else could that possibly mean?" Victoria's face crumpled. I was scared. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. "You could have gotten a job," I said. "You could have stopped spending money you didn't have. You could have been honest with my son instead of lying to him every single day." I turned to Daniel. He was still standing there, frozen, staring at Victoria like she was a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd always been. "Did you know?" I asked him. "About the debt." $68,000, he said numbly. "On the credit cards. She told me it was $68,000, not 185. "Well, now you know," Victoria said bitterly. "Now you both know everything." Happy. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Get away from me." "Daniel?" I said, "Get away from me." His voice was louder now, shaking with an anger I'd rarely heard from him. "We're done. You hear me? We are done. I want you out of my house. I want you gone. You can't just, I can and I am. It's over, Victoria. Everything is over." She stared at him, and I saw the moment she realized he meant it. Saw her face shift from desperation to rage. "Fine," she spat. "Fine. You're just like your parents anyway. Pathetic and broke and dying. I deserve better than this." She turned and stalked away across the parking lot, her fake belly shifting with every step, one bare foot and one high heel clicking an uneven rhythm on the pavement. We watched her go in silence. Then Daniel turned back to us. The anger had drained from his face, leaving only grief. "Mom," he said. "Dad, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. Please." I looked at my son. At the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, the person he might still be underneath all the mistakes. "I forgive you," I said. His face lit up with hope. "But I can't trust you," I continued. "Not yet, maybe not for a long time. You've hurt us too deeply, Daniel. You've broken something that's going to take years to repair." "I understand," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." "And maybe you will," I said softly. "Maybe you will." When we got home that night, Thomas helped me up the stairs to our bedroom. My foot was throbbing, my heart was shattered, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lighter, somehow. Like a weight I'd been carrying had finally been set down. I didn't know that on the internet something was exploding. Thomas cleaned and bandaged my foot while I sat on the edge of our bed, too exhausted to do anything but watch. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound looked angry and red. Another complication of diabetes that would take weeks to heal. "We should change the locks," Thomas said quietly as he wrapped gauze around my ankle, "in case Victoria still has a key to Daniel's place and tries to come after us." "She won't," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We should, anyway." He secured the bandage with medical tape, just to be safe. I nodded, too tired to argue. Thomas helped me change into my nightgown, the old cotton one that had been washed so many times it was soft as cloth, and tucked me into bed like I was a child. "Try to sleep," he said, kissing my forehead. "Tomorrow we'll figure everything out." But I was already asleep before he turned off the light. I didn't dream. I just fell into a deep, exhausted darkness and stayed there for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through our bedroom window, and Thomas was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't read. "What is it?" I asked, my voice rough from sleep. He looked at me and I saw tears in his eyes. "Eleanor, you need to see this." He handed me his phone. It took me a moment to focus on the screen, and when I did, I didn't understand what I was seeing. A video, playing on what looked like Facebook, a video of us. Of me and Thomas at the Harbor House sitting at our table with Daniel and Victoria. I watch myself in my 15-year-old dress, watch Victoria announce her pregnancy, watch the whole nightmare play out in miniature on a tiny screen. Someone recorded it, Thomas said. Multiple people, actually. This is one of at least a dozen videos that got posted last night. I stared at the screen, at the number beneath the video. 10 million views in 12 hours. 40 million by morning. That can't be right, I said. That's 40 million. 40 million people have watched the worst night of my life in less than a day. 40 million strangers had seen me cry, had seen my medical bills, had seen my son betray me. There's more, Thomas said gently. He took the phone back and scrolled to show me. Comments. Thousands and thousands of comments. This breaks my heart. Someone start a GoFundMe for them. The son is disgusting, the wife is evil. I hope they both go to jail. My mother has diabetes too. I'm calling her right now to tell her I love her. 46 years of marriage and still fighting for each other. That's real love. The comments went on forever. Strangers from all over the world crying for us, angry on our behalf, sending prayers and blessings and love. The news picked it up, Thomas continued. Local stations first, then CNN, Fox, MSNBC. There are reporters outside right now asking for interviews. I looked at him in shock. Outside our house. I told them no, but Eleanor? He hesitated. The FBI called. My heart stopped. The FBI. Victoria's fake pregnancy scam. The Instagram account where she collected donations. That's wire fraud. $23,400 in donations from people in multiple states, all based on a lie. The FBI is opening an investigation. I couldn't process it, couldn't make sense of any of it. Last night, I'd gone to bed feeling like the most invisible woman in the world, and this morning, 40 million people knew my name. There's a knock at the door, Thomas said as someone rapped on our front door downstairs. That's probably Martha from next door. She called an hour ago asking if she could bring us dinner. Martha, our neighbor of 15 years, who we'd barely spoken to beyond polite hellos. She wanted to bring us dinner. And the mailman already came. Thomas continued. We got 73 cards today from strangers. People sending money, sending prayers, sending... His voice broke. Sending love. I started crying then. Not from grief this time, but from something else. Something I couldn't name. All these years I'd felt invisible, felt like a burden, felt like my suffering didn't matter. And now millions of people were telling me I mattered, that I was seen, that I was valued. Thomas held me while I cried, and we stayed like that until another knock came at the door. Over the next few hours, our small house became a way station for kindness. Martha brought a casserole and homemade bread. Jim from across the street brought groceries, real groceries, the kind we couldn't normally afford. The woman from the corner house, whose name I'd never learned, brought flowers and a card that said simply, "You deserve better." The mail carrier had to make a special trip because our mailbox couldn't hold everything. Cards from California, from New York, from Texas, from places I'd never been and probably would never go. Strangers telling us they were praying for us, that they'd donated to a GoFundMe. Someone had started that we'd inspired them to be better to their own parents. By late afternoon, Thomas's phone was ringing constantly. News outlets wanting interviews. Talk shows wanting us to appear. Lawyers offering to represent us pro bono if we wanted to sue Daniel and Victoria. We should turn off the phone, I said. Probably. Thomas agreed, but neither of us moved to do it. Because mixed in with all the chaos and overwhelming attention was something precious. Validation. Proof that we weren't crazy, weren't weak, weren't the problem. Proof that what had happened to us was wrong and that people cared. Eleanor, Thomas said as the sun started to set on what might have been the strangest day of my life. The FBI agent wants to talk to us tomorrow about pressing charges. I looked at him. Against Victoria. And possibly Daniel for elder financial abuse. I closed my eyes. My son. They wanted me to press charges against my son. We don't have to decide now, Thomas said quietly. But I knew we'd have to decide soon. 3 days after the FBI announced they were pressing charges, Daniel called. I stared at my phone, his name glowing on the screen. Thomas was in the garden, and I was alone in the kitchen with the decision of whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Mom. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. Mom, please don't hang up. What do you want, Daniel? I need to see you. I need to explain. There's so much you don't know, so much I couldn't say at the restaurant because Victoria was there. I closed my eyes. Daniel. Please, just one conversation. That's all I'm asking. I have evidence. Evidence that Victoria manipulated everything, that she's been lying to both of us. Evidence. The word made me pause. What kind of evidence? Text messages, emails. Proof that the fake pregnancy was her idea, not mine. Proof that she's been having an affair with Preston for over a year. Proof that she planned the whole thing. His voice cracked. Mom, I was fooled too. I'm a victim in this just like you are. A victim? My son thought he was a victim. Come to the house tomorrow, I heard myself say. 2 p.m. Thomas will be here too. Thank you. Thank you, Mom. I promise after you see what I have, you'll understand. He arrived the next day carrying a folder different from the one Thomas had brought to the restaurant, but eerily similar. He looked terrible. Unshaven, his clothes wrinkled his eyes, shadowed with exhaustion. Thank you for seeing me, he said as I let him in. Thomas was already sitting on the couch, his arms crossed, his expression neutral. Daniel flinched when he saw him. Show us what you brought, Thomas said. No greeting, no warmth. Daniel sat down and opened the folder. Inside were printouts of text messages, screenshots of emails, photos. This is from Victoria's phone, Daniel said. I got access through our shared iCloud account. Look at this conversation with Preston from January. He showed us a text exchange. Victoria, the parking lot thing worked. Eleanor saw us. She's going to tell Daniel. Preston, perfect. Phase 1 complete. Now we gaslight her into thinking she's losing it. Victoria, Daniel will help. He doesn't know what we're really doing, but he'll play along if I cry enough. I stared at the words. Phase 1. Gaslight her. They planned it. Daniel said, his voice shaking. They planned for you to see them together. They wanted you to tell me so I'd think you were confused when I investigated and found nothing wrong. You told me I was imagining things, I said slowly. You said my blood sugar was making me paranoid because I believed Victoria. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. She cried and said you'd always hated her, that you were trying to break us up. She was so convincing, Mom. I didn't know she was manipulating both of us. He showed us more messages. Plans to fake the pregnancy, discussions about my life insurance, calculations about how long I might live. She did this, Daniel said. All of it. The fake belly, the donations, the plan to wait for you to die. I didn't know about any of it until the FBI showed me the evidence. I looked at my son's face, at the tears streaming down his cheeks, at the desperation in his eyes, and I wanted to believe him. God help me, part of me wanted to believe that my son had been fooled, that he wasn't complicit, that somewhere underneath all this was the boy I'd raised. But Thomas spoke before I could. Where were you on March 12th? He asked quietly. Daniel blinked. What? March 12th, when your mother was in the ICU. Where were you? I told you. I didn't get your calls because you were at a spa, a $920 couples massage with Victoria. Thomas's voice was cold. If she was manipulating you, if you were her victim too, why were you at a spa with her while your mother was dying? Daniel's face went pale. I didn't know Mom was in the ICU yet. I called you 13 times. Thomas leaned forward. The first call was from the ambulance. I left a voicemail saying your mother had collapsed and we were heading to the emergency room. You got that message and chose not to call back. The spa doesn't allow phones. You checked your phone twice during that massage, Thomas said. Victoria posted a photo on Instagram. You're in the background holding your phone. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. I called you at 2:35 p.m. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were shaking. If Victoria was manipulating you, I said softly, if you were being fooled, if you were trying to be a good son, why didn't you come when I was dying? Silence. I want you to leave, I said. Mom, please. I want you to leave my house. I want you to take your folder of evidence and your tears and your excuses, and I want you to go. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood up. You came here to manipulate me one more time, to make me think you're a victim so I won't testify against you, to gain my sympathy so maybe I'll help pay for your legal defense. That's not get out. My voice didn't shake. Get out of my house and don't come back. Daniel stood clutching his folder. I'm your son. No, I said. My son died the day he stood in a hospital hallway and calculated how long his mother had left to live. You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Thomas came to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. Are you okay? He asked. No, I said. But I will be. Because I finally understood some people can't be saved. Some people choose their path, and no amount of love or forgiveness or second chances will change them. My son had chosen his path a long time ago, and I was choosing mine now, without him. After I closed the door on Daniel, I expected to feel strong, empowered, vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. I stood in my living room with Thomas beside me, and all I could think was, I just cut off my only child. The boy I carried for 9 months nursed through pneumonia at age 4, cheered for at every baseball game, walked down the aisle at his wedding. Gone. Did I do the right thing? I whispered. Thomas pulled me into his arms. Yes, you protected yourself. That's always the right thing. But it didn't feel right. It felt like something had been carved out of my chest and left a hole that would never fill. The doorbell rang 2 hours later. I wasn't going to answer it. I thought it might be Daniel coming back with more excuses, more tears, more manipulation. But Thomas looked through the peephole and said, It's Caroline. Caroline Bennett stood on our porch holding 2 grocery bags and wearing an expression of fierce determination. I heard what happened, she said as I let her in. Daniel called me trying to get me to convince you to talk to him. I told him to go to hell. Despite everything, I almost smiled. I brought dinner. Caroline continued setting the bags on our kitchen counter. And I'm not leaving until you eat it. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. She was right. Since the Mother's Day dinner 3 weeks ago, I'd barely been able to eat. My blood sugar had been erratic. My foot wound, which had been healing, had started to bleed again from stress. Caroline cooked while Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table in exhausted silence. She made chicken soup from scratch, the kind that takes hours of simmering, the kind my mother used to make when I was sick. How did you know how to make this? I asked as she ladled soup into bowls. Your mother's recipe, Caroline said. I found it in some old family papers. Thomas's mother kept all her recipes, and when she died, your mother-in-law's sister gave them to me. I've been holding on to them for years, waiting for the right time. We ate soup and homemade bread, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. Not happiness, not peace, but something close to comfort. The GoFundMe is at $538,000, Caroline said as we cleared the dishes. I've been monitoring the comments. People want to help you. They're angry on your behalf. $538,000 from strangers who'd watched our nightmare unfold on their phones and decided we mattered. I don't know how to manage that much money, I admitted. I do, Caroline said. I'm a certified financial planner. It's what I do for a living. If you'll let me, I can help you set up accounts, pay off the medical debt, create a trust for future expenses. I looked at this woman, Thomas's half-sister, a stranger until 3 weeks ago, offering to step into the gap my own son had left. Why are you doing this? I asked. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Because family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. And I'm showing up. Over the next 2 weeks, Caroline became a constant presence. She came every morning to check my blood sugar, just like Daniel had promised to do, and never did. She organized our medical bills into spreadsheets. She set up appointments with Thomas's oncologist, with my endocrinologist, with a podiatrist for my foot. She hired a visiting nurse, a kind woman named Jessica, who came 3 times a week to clean my wound and check my vitals and make sure I was taking my medications properly. With Caroline's help, we paid off every medical bill, $168,500. Every invoice stamped paid in full in red ink. Thomas started radiation therapy on June 15th. I went with him to every appointment, holding his hand while the machine hummed and clicked and tried to kill the cancer growing inside him. "I'm scared," he admitted one night after treatment. We were lying in bed and I could feel him trembling. "Me too," I said. "What if the treatment doesn't work? What if I die and leave you alone?" "Then I'll be alone," I said, "but I'll survive, because that's what we do. We survive." The FBI called in early July. They'd finished their investigation and were ready to file formal charges. "We have enough evidence to charge Daniel Hayes with conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment," the agent told us over the phone. "Preston Walker will face embezzlement and conspiracy charges. Victoria Pierce will face fraud charges related to the fake pregnancy donations." "What about attempted murder?" Thomas asked. A pause. "We don't have enough evidence for that charge. The nursing home inquiries and internet searches show intent to harm, but no actual attempt was made. The prosecutor believes conspiracy to commit elder abuse is the strongest charge we can prove. Not attempted murder, just conspiracy to abuse. Just planning to lock me away and let me die slowly without my medication." "How long could he get?" I asked. "For conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud, 10 to 15 years if convicted on all counts." 15 years. My son could spend 15 years in prison for trying to destroy me. "Will you testify?" the agent asked. Thomas and I looked at each other. "Yes," I said, "we'll testify. Because if we didn't, Daniel would do this to someone else. Some other elderly parent who trusted their child. Some other woman who thought her son would protect her instead of plotting her death." 2 days later, Daniel's lawyer called. He wanted to negotiate a plea deal. "Absolutely not," Thomas told him. "We're going to trial. We're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what your client did." The lawyer tried to argue. Tried to say a trial would be hard on us, that we should consider our health, that the stress could kill us. "Then we'll die telling the truth," Thomas said and hung up. That night, Caroline brought dinner again. This time she stayed sitting on our couch with a glass of wine looking at old photo albums with us. "Tell me about Thomas as a child," she said. And Thomas told stories about growing up in Somerville, about his father who'd had an affair, and created Caroline about the family secrets that had kept them apart for 40 years. "I wish I'd known you sooner," Caroline said, her eyes wet. "We know each other now," Thomas said. "That's what matters. I watched them, this brother and sister, separated by shame and lies, now finding each other in the wreckage of our family, and I thought about Daniel. He'd had everything. Love, support, opportunity, inheritance, and he'd thrown it all away for money he didn't even need. While Caroline, who'd had nothing, no father, no family, no inheritance, had built a life of integrity and was now giving us everything. "Thank you," I said to her. "For what?" "For being the child I needed." Caroline's face crumpled. She came and hugged me, and I held her and thought, this is what family is supposed to feel like. Safe. Chosen. Real. Not the hollow performance Daniel had given us for years. Not the calculations and manipulations and lies. Just this. Simple human kindness. Someone showing up because they want to, not because they have to. "The trial starts in 6 weeks, Thomas said. I nodded. "We'll be ready." Because we had to be. Because justice demanded it. Because somewhere out there, another family was being destroyed by a child they trusted, and maybe our story could save them. We couldn't save ourselves from Daniel, but maybe we could save someone else. Before I take you into that courtroom, before I reveal the emails, the searches, the calculated plan Daniel had been building for months, I need to know you're still here. If you've stayed with me through Eleanor's pain, through Thomas's sacrifice, through all the heartbreak, comment the number 15 below. just 15. Let me see who's ready for the truth. And a gentle reminder what follows includes dramatized courtroom testimony for narrative impact. If you'd rather not continue, you're welcome to pause here. But if you're ready to see evil fully exposed, stay with me. Justice is coming. The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the hallway outside. Someone had made signs, "Justice for Eleanor" and "Protect our elders." Strangers who'd watched our story unfold now waited to see how it would end. I sat in the front row with Thomas on one side and Caroline on the other. Daniel sat at the defense table in a suit I didn't recognize his lawyer beside him, whispering instructions. He didn't look at me. The prosecutor was a woman named Sarah Collins, mid-40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice that somehow made everything she said sound irrefutable. "Your Honor," she began, "the evidence will show that Daniel Hayes didn't just neglect his elderly parents. He orchestrated a deliberate, calculated plan to have his mother declared incompetent, institutionalized, and ultimately allow her to die so he could inherit her life insurance and savings." Daniel's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Sarah Collins opened her laptop and the courtroom's large screen flickered to life. This is an email sent from Daniel Hayes to Preston Walker on December 3, 2023, 6 months before the Mother's Day incident. I read the words on the screen. From D. Hayes at charlestontech.com to P. Walker at charlestontech.com, date December 3rd, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Subject the plan. Preston Phase 1. Make her think she's crazy. You and V stage the parking lot thing next month. She'll tell me I'll investigate, find nothing. Tell her she's imagining things. We do this 2 to 3 more times until everyone believes she's got dementia from the diabetes. Phase 2. Get conservatorship. Once she's incompetent, I become legal guardian. Move her to Palmetto Senior Care. Memory unit. No expensive treatments. Phase 3. Wait. Nursing home costs $8,000 per month. Her $50,000 runs out in 6 months. Then Medicaid. Then I can authorize comfort care only. No insulin, no ICU, no interventions. She'll decline naturally. No one questions it because dementia patients often refuse treatment. Dad's insurance is $50,000. Hers is $75,000, plus whatever's left in savings. We split 60-40 after your embezzlement debt is covered. Destroy this email after reading. Preston Walker backed up all company emails to a private server, Sarah Collins explained. He kept them as insurance evidence he later turned over to the FBI as part of his plea deal. Daniel thought the email was destroyed. It wasn't. The courtroom was silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "He planned it," I whispered. "He planned every detail." Sarah Collins pulled up another document. This is Daniel Hayes' Google search history from December 2023 through March 2024. The screen filled with searches. How to get conservatorship of elderly parent South Carolina. Signs of dementia versus high blood sugar confusion. Nursing home costs. Charleston can dementia patients. Refuse medical treatment. How long does insulin rationing take to cause death? Legal guardian authority over medical decisions. The defendant researched every step, Sarah Collins said. He knew exactly what he was doing. Preston Walker was called to testify. He'd taken a plea deal 8 years in exchange for full cooperation. Daniel approached me in November. Preston said not looking at Daniel. He said his mother was a financial burden, said she was going to drain his inheritance with her medical bills. He asked if I'd help make her look unstable. "What did you do?" Sarah Collins asked. I agreed to pretend to have an affair with Victoria. Daniel's plan was for Eleanor to see us report it to Daniel, and then we'd deny everything. Make her think she was hallucinated or confused. "Did you actually have an affair with Victoria?" "No. We staged 3 encounters where Eleanor might see us. The parking lot kiss, a coffee shop meeting, a lunch downtown. Each time we made sure she could photograph us, but that the photos would be ambiguous enough to deny." "Why did you agree to this?" Preston's voice dropped. I'd embezzled $68,000 from the company. Daniel knew. He said if I helped him, he'd forgive the debt and not press charges. Victoria Pierce was called next. She wore a plain gray dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked 10 years older than she had at the restaurant. "Did you know about Daniel's full plan?" Sarah Collins asked. "Not at first," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "He told me we were just going to mess with Eleanor a little, make her paranoid. I thought it was mean, but I didn't think—" She stopped. "I didn't know about the nursing home, about letting her die. I swear I didn't know until the FBI showed me the emails." "When did you learn the truth?" "June, when they arrested me. The agent showed me everything, the searches, the emails, the plan. I threw up in the interrogation room." "Why did you agree to fake the pregnancy?" "Daniel said we needed money. He said his parents were bleeding us dry with their medical bills. He said if we could get donations from the fake pregnancy, we could pay off some debt. I knew it was wrong, but I was—" Her voice broke. "I was scared of him. He'd become someone I didn't recognize." The nursing home director testified next, a man named Robert Phillips, director of Palmetto Senior Care. "Mr. Hayes contacted us in December," he said. "He toured our memory care unit twice, in January and February. He asked very specific questions about patients who refused treatment." "What kind of questions?" "He asked if we force patients to take medication if they have dementia and don't understand they need it. I told him we respect patient autonomy. He seemed pleased by that answer." The prosecutor brought up more evidence. Phone records showing Daniel had ignored Dr. Walsh's calls in September. Bank statements showing he'd increased my life insurance from $75,000 to $150,000 in October, 6 months before the crisis. He doubled the policy, Sarah Collins said, because he knew he'd need more money to cover his debts and his lifestyle after his parents were gone. Finally, the blood donation records from 2016. Eleanor Hayes donated 2 units of AB negative blood to save Victoria Pierce's life after a car accident, Sarah Collins told the jury. Victoria knew this. Daniel knew this. And 8 years later, Daniel planned to let Eleanor die slowly in a nursing home so he could inherit her insurance money. I watched the jury's faces, saw disgust, saw anger, saw one woman wipe tears from her eyes. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. My foot wound had reopened from stress, and I could feel blood seeping into my shoe. "Mrs. Hayes," Sarah Collins said gently, "did you ever suspect your son was planning to harm you?" "No," I said. My voice cracked. "I knew he was neglectful. I knew he didn't care much, but I never thought—" I looked at Daniel for the first time since the trial started. "I never thought he wanted me dead." Daniel's face was stone. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The judge sentenced him 3 weeks later. I wasn't there. I couldn't watch. But Caroline called me with the results. 12 years, she said. Federal prison. No parole eligibility for 10. 12 years. My son would be 58 when he got out. I'd be 81, if I lived that long. "How do you feel?" Caroline asked. "Empty," I said. "Just empty." Because there was no satisfaction in this, no victory, just the cold knowledge that the person I'd loved most in the world had tried to kill me for money. And now he'd spend the next decade in a cage thinking about what he'd lost. Not me. Not his father, not love or family or redemption, just freedom. That night, Thomas held me while I cried. "He's gone," I said. "Our son is really gone." "He was gone a long time ago," Thomas said quietly. "We just didn't want to see it." And he was right. The Daniel I'd loved, the little boy who used to bring me dandelions, had died years ago. What remained was just a stranger wearing my son's face. A stranger who would spend the next 12 years behind bars. And I would spend however many years I had left learning to live without him. 6 months after my son was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about him for an entire day. That was the first day I believed I might survive this. It was February 9 months since the Mother's Day dinner that had destroyed and saved us. I was sitting in Dr. Walsh's office for my quarterly checkup, and she was smiling at my chart. Your A1C is 6.8, she said. That's the best it's been in 5 years. Your kidney function has stabilized. The neuropathy hasn't progressed. Eleanor, you're doing remarkably well. I have help, I said, and I did, but not from the person I'd expected. Caroline came every morning at 7. Not 6, like Daniel had promised and never delivered, but 7, a reasonable hour that didn't require her to wake before dawn. She checked my blood sugar, made sure I took my medications, cooked breakfast while we talked about everything and nothing. She'd moved to Charleston permanently in September, bought a small house 3 miles from ours. She said it was for work she could do financial planning anywhere, but we all knew the truth. She'd moved here for us, for the family she'd been denied for 50 years. My father didn't know about me until I was 10, she told us one evening over dinner. His affair with my mother was brief. When she got pregnant, she didn't tell him. But when I got sick, leukemia, she had no choice. She needed his medical history. Thomas had gone very still. I didn't know you had leukemia. I was in remission by the time I met you at Dad's funeral. You were 20, I was 17. You looked at me like I was a ghost. Caroline smiled sadly. Your mother called me a mistake, said I had no right to any inheritance. You didn't say anything. I was a coward, Thomas said quietly. You were a kid whose mother had just found out her dead husband had a secret daughter. I don't blame you. Caroline reached across the table and took his hand, but I'm glad we found each other again, even if it took a nightmare to make it happen. Thomas's cancer treatment ended in October. His final PET scan came back clear in November. Doctor. Morrison used the word remission, carefully, cautiously, but we heard the hope underneath. If it stays gone for 5 years, we call it cured, he said. 5 years. Thomas would be 76. I'd be 74. We could make it to 74. The GoFundMe money, $542,000 after fees, sat in a medical trust Caroline had set up. She'd invested it conservatively and it was earning interest. Enough to cover our medications, our doctor visits, our future emergencies for the rest of our lives. You'll never have to choose between insulin and electricity again, Caroline said when she showed us the quarterly statement. You're safe. Safe. A word I hadn't felt in years. My foot finally healed in December. The visiting nurse, Jessica, examined it and declared the wound closed. A small white scar remained a permanent reminder of the days I'd hidden my deterioration from everyone, including myself. You're lucky you didn't lose the foot, Jessica said. Diabetic wounds that severe often require amputation. I'd come that close. To losing my foot, my life, everything. And my son had been counting on it. Daniel wrote me a letter in January. It arrived in a prison envelope, my name and address in his handwriting. I stared at it for 3 days before Thomas asked, Are you going to open it? I don't know, I said. You don't have to. I burned it in the fireplace. Didn't read a single word. Whatever he had to say, apologies, excuses, justifications, I didn't want to hear it. I'd spent 46 years listening to Daniel's words while ignoring his actions. I was done. 2 weeks later, another letter came. I burned that one too. Then another, and another. He's written you 11 letters, Thomas said in February, and I've burned 11 letters, I replied. Do you think you'll ever want to know what they say? No, I was certain. Whatever he has to say now doesn't change what he did. Words are cheap. I learned that the hard way. Caroline took us to physical therapy twice a week. My balance had improved. My strength was returning. Thomas's energy was coming back slowly, his body recovering from months of radiation. You're both doing great, the therapist said. I've seen patients half your age who don't work this hard. We worked hard because we had a reason to live now, not for Daniel. Not for some imagined future where he'd magically become the son we'd wanted, but for ourselves, for each other. For Caroline, who'd shown us what real family looked like. On Valentine's Day, Caroline brought us dinner and a card. Inside, she'd written, To the parents I chose, thank you for choosing me back. I cried reading it. Happy tears this time. You know what I realized, I said to Thomas that night as we got ready for bed? I spent 46 years trying to make Daniel love me, trying to be a good enough mother that he'd want to take care of us, and I was chasing something that was never there. It wasn't your fault, Thomas said. I know. But I kept thinking if I was just less of a burden, less expensive, less needy, maybe he'd care. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. 70 years old, gray hair, wrinkles, scars. But Caroline showed up when I was at my worst, bleeding foot, rationed insulin, drowning in debt. And she didn't run. She stayed. That's the difference between real love and obligation, Thomas said. I nodded. Daniel felt obligated. Caroline chose us. The next morning, Caroline arrived with coffee and fresh croissants from the bakery. I have news, she said, her eyes bright. I'm adopting you both. Thomas laughed. You can't adopt people our age. Not legally, but emotionally, absolutely. You're my parents now, the ones I always deserved. Dehors. We sat at our kitchen table, the three of us, the family we'd built from ruins, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because Daniel was gone, not because justice had been served, not because the money was secured or the medical bills were paid, but because I'd finally learned the difference between the family you're born with and the family you choose. And I'd chosen well. Mother's Day 2025. Exactly 1 year since the dinner that changed everything. I woke at 7 to sunlight and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. I lay still waiting for the grief I'd expected to feel on this anniversary. But it didn't come. What I felt instead was peace. Thomas was already awake reading the newspaper in bed. Caroline's here, he said. Heard her car 20 minutes ago. She has a key. She doesn't need to knock anymore. He smiled. I know. We'd given Caroline a key in March. She'd cried when we handed it to her, this woman excluded from family, her whole life finally being told she belonged. Downstairs, Caroline was making breakfast. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits. You didn't have to do all this, I said, kissing her cheek. Yes, I did. It's Mother's Day. And you're my mother now, so I get to spoil you. Caroline calling me Mom still made my chest tight. Grief for the child I'd lost. Gratitude for the one I'd found. You didn't replace him, Thomas had said when I confessed this. You just filled a space that was always empty. We ate at our kitchen table, the three of us. Caroline told stories about her childhood, about the mother who'd raised her alone. Mom used to make me breakfast every Mother's Day, Caroline said. She'd say, you made me a mother, so this day belongs to both of us. I never understood until now. Where is your mother? I asked. She died in 2015. Breast cancer. I was alone after that. Caroline's voice was steady but sad. No siblings, no father, just me. You're not alone anymore, Thomas said. I know. She smiled. I have you both. I have a family now, a real one. After breakfast, we sat in the living room. The room was different than a year ago. Photographs on the walls, pictures of us at Thomas's final radiation appointment, at Caroline's birthday dinner at Thanksgiving, when we'd burned the turkey and laughed until we cried. No pictures of Daniel. I'd taken them down in September and stored them in a box in the attic. Maybe someday I'd look at them again. Maybe not. Do you want to talk about it? Caroline asked gently. About last year? What's there to say? A year ago I learned my son wanted me dead. Today I'm sitting with people who actually love me. I know which Mother's Day I prefer. Do you ever think about him? Less and less, I admitted. At first, every day, every hour. But now whole days go by where I don't think of him at all. And I don't feel guilty anymore. He wrote you again, Thomas said quietly. Another letter came yesterday. Burn it, I said. Or throw it away. I don't care which. You don't want to know what it says. No, he's written me 23 letters in 9 months. If I wanted to hear what he had to say, I would have read the first one. Thomas nodded. His lawyer called last month, asked if we'd write letters supporting his early release, said Daniel's been a model prisoner taken classes found religion. Almost laughed. What did you say? I said no. I said he can serve every single day of his 12 years, and when he gets out, He shouldn't expect to find us waiting." "Good," I said. Caroline was quiet for a moment. "I saw Victoria last month at the grocery store. She got out on parole in March. She's working at a coffee shop downtown." Caroline wrapped her hands around her mug. "She saw me, started crying, asked if you'd ever forgive her." "What did you tell her?" "I told her forgiveness wasn't hers to ask for, that she'd have to live with what she did just like you have to live with what was done to you." "That was perfect," I said. We spent the afternoon in the garden. Thomas had started planting again tomatoes, peppers, herbs, things that grew and thrived. "I never had time for this when I was working," he said, kneeling in the dirt, "always too busy. And now I know there's nothing more important than this, being here, being alive, growing things." Caroline helped him plant marigolds. I sat in a lawn chair, face turned to the sun, feeling warm and safe and loved. This is what Mother's Day should feel like, I thought. Not expensive restaurants and fake smiles, just this, quiet moments. People who choose to be together. That evening, Caroline made pot roast. We ate at our dining table, the one Thomas and I had bought 40 years ago, scarred from decades of use. "A toast," Caroline said, raising her glass, "to the mothers we lost and the mothers we found." We clinked glasses. Thomas kissed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said, "for surviving, for choosing yourself, for letting Daniel go. I didn't really have a choice." "Yes, you did. You could have kept hoping he'd change, kept waiting for him to become the son you wanted, but you didn't. You accepted reality and built a new life." He was right. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal itself, but accepting it. Accepting that Daniel was who he was, that he'd never be, who I wanted, that I had to let go of the dream of him to survive. "Next year," Caroline said, "I want to take you both somewhere, a trip, somewhere you've never been." "We've never been much of anywhere," Thomas said. "Then we have a lot of options." Caroline grinned. "We have a whole year to plan, a whole year, a future. Something to look forward to besides survival." After Caroline left, Thomas and I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over Charleston. The same city where we'd been humiliated. The same streets we'd walked in shame. But everything looked different now. "Happy Mother's Day," Thomas said. "It was," I said. "It really was." And for the first time in years, Mother's Day hadn't been about performance or obligation or trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. It had been about the quiet, steady love of people who chose to show up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the difference between Daniel and Caroline. Daniel had been obligated to love me and chose not to. Caroline had no obligation at all and chose to love me anyway. I knew which one mattered more. I knew which one was real. And I knew I'd finally found the family I'd been searching for my entire life. Not the one I'd been born with, but the one I'd built from the ruins of betrayal, the one that would last. People ask me if I've forgiven my son. They want a story about redemption, about love conquering all, about a mother's heart being so big that it can absorb any betrayal and still find room for mercy. But this isn't that story. And I'm not sorry about that. I'm sitting on my porch on a warm May evening 1 year and 2 weeks after the dinner that exposed my son's plan to kill me. Thomas is beside me, cancer-free for 7 months. Caroline is in the kitchen making tea. The sun is setting over Charleston, painting the sky gold and pink. And I am at peace. Not because I forgave Daniel, but because I finally gave myself permission not to. Let me tell you what I learned. I learned that not everyone deserves forgiveness. Just because someone is family doesn't mean you have to accept their abuse. Daniel didn't make a mistake. He didn't have a moment of weakness. He spent months researching how to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, and left to die. That wasn't an error in judgment. That was calculated evil. I learned that boundaries aren't cruelty. Cutting off contact with Daniel wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. Every letter he sends, and he's sent 27 now, goes straight into the trash. I don't read them. I don't need to know what he has to say. His words had 46 years to match his actions, and they never did. I learned that family is who shows up. Caroline shares no childhood memories with me. She wasn't there for Daniel's first steps, or his high school graduation, or his wedding, but she was there every morning checking my blood sugar. She was there at every one of Thomas's radiation appointments. She showed up when showing up mattered. I learned you can heal without your abuser's participation. People kept telling me I needed closure, that I should visit Daniel in prison, hear his apology, let him explain. But I didn't need any of that. His apology wouldn't undo the Google searches about how long insulin rationing takes to kill someone. His explanation wouldn't erase the emails planning my institutionalization. I healed by choosing to heal, not by waiting for him to give me permission. There's something I never told anyone until now, something I did 3 days after I got out of the ICU last March. I changed my will. I was lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, machines beeping around me, and I remembered the hallway conversation Thomas had overheard. How long do you think she has? A year, maybe less. Then we wait. I called a lawyer from my hospital bed, had him come to the ICU. I changed my beneficiary from Daniel to the American Diabetes Association, every penny of my $75,000 life insurance policy. Daniel was specifically excluded. I kept that will in my desk drawer for months, a secret weapon, proof that I'd protected myself even when I was at my weakest. On Mother's Day this year, I took it out and looked at it. Read the words. My son Daniel Hayes is specifically excluded from any inheritance. Thomas asked if I was going to tear it up now that we had the GoFundMe money, now that the life insurance didn't matter as much. I said no, I'm keeping it. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder that I chose myself when it mattered, that I set a boundary when I was dying and stuck to it when I was healing. That will is staying exactly as it is. And when I die, whether that's next year or 20 years from now, Daniel will get nothing from me. Not money, not forgiveness, not the closure he thinks he deserves. Nothing. Because that's what he gave me when I was rationing my insulin and he was at a spa, when I was in the ICU and he was getting a massage, when doctor. Walsh called him 3 times and he couldn't be bothered to call back. Nothing. Caroline told me something last week that I want to share. She'd kept in touch with Anthony Romano, the restaurant manager who'd helped our video go viral. He told her that the night of the Mother's Day dinner, he hadn't just allowed people to film. He'd deliberately positioned staff members with phones to capture every angle. He'd made sure the lighting was good. He'd personally uploaded the clearest footage to multiple platforms. Why? Caroline had asked him. Because 30 years ago, Thomas Hayes ran into a burning building to save my father's life, Anthony said. And when I saw what that son was doing to him and his wife, I knew I had to return the favor. I had to make sure the world saw it, make sure justice happened. Another angel, another person showing up when it mattered. Here's what I want you to know if you're reading this and going through something similar. You do not have to forgive to move on. I moved on without forgiving Daniel. I'm happy without forgiving Daniel. Peace came from accepting what he did not, from absolving him of it. You do not have to keep toxic family in your life. Blood relation doesn't grant unlimited chances to harm you. You are allowed to say enough and mean it. You are not obligated to provide closure to your abuser. Daniel wants me to visit him in prison, to read his letters, to hear his explanations. But I don't owe him my time, my energy, or my pain. He lost the right to those things when he planned my death. You can heal without reconciliation. Thomas and I are healthier than we've been in years. Our A1C levels are good. His cancer is in remission. We have savings, we have family, we have hope. None of that required Daniel's participation. The best revenge is living well. Daniel is in a federal prison cell. I'm sitting on my porch with my husband and my chosen daughter, watching the sunset, planning a trip to the mountains next month. He lost everything. I gained everything that matters. This is my legacy. Not money or property or forgiveness, but survival. The stubborn refusal to let someone else's evil destroy me. I was invisible for so long, rationing medication in bathrooms at 2 a.m., hiding my deterioration, letting my son gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. But I'm not invisible anymore. 40 million people saw my story. Strangers donated over $500,000. The FBI investigated. Justice was served. I am seen. I am valued. I am enough. And I didn't need my son's approval to become those things. If you're in a situation like mine, if someone you love is harming you, using you, waiting for you to die, please hear me. You deserve better. You are worth more. And you are allowed to save yourself even if it means losing them, especially if it means losing them. I lost a son who chose money over love, but I found a daughter who chose love over everything. I'd make that trade again in a heartbeat. This is my legacy I survived, not by forgiving, not by forgetting, but by choosing myself when it mattered most. And that in the end is enough. Looking back at this family drama story, I see the lessons God wanted me to learn. He didn't save me from the betrayal, but He carried me through it. He put Caroline in my path when I needed family most. He showed me that sometimes protecting yourself isn't faithlessness, it's wisdom. Don't be like I was. Don't ignore the red flags because you love someone. Don't sacrifice your health to avoid being a burden. Don't believe that blood relation requires unlimited tolerance for abuse. I spent years making myself smaller, quieter, less expensive, hoping my son would finally see my worth. But worth isn't something you earn from people who've already decided you're worthless. Here's my truth. Family drama stories like mine aren't rare. They're everywhere. Adult children waiting for inheritances, elderly parents rationing medication, gaslighting disguised as concern. We don't talk about these family drama stories enough because we're ashamed. But shame protects the abuser, not the victim. I believe forgiveness is powerful, but boundaries are holy. I believe family matters, but chosen family can matter more. I believe in second chances, but not 27th chances. Some family revenge stories end with reconciliation. This is one of those family revenge stories where justice came through the courts, not through personal vendettas. And unlike other family revenge stories, you might have heard mine ended with peace, not bitterness. Peace doesn't require the presence of everyone you once loved. Sometimes it requires their absence. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. Have you experienced something similar? How did you handle it? Your story might help someone else survive theirs. And if this video helped you, please share it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There are more stories coming that might change your perspective on family loyalty and self-worth. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Your time and attention mean everything. A gentle warning. Upcoming stories contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If dramatic family narratives aren't for you, feel free to explore other content that better suits your preferences. Take care of yourself first, always.
That's where is the story end. Thanks for being here. I will see you in the next time.